let's get to it. And so when I was 13 years old, I struggled a lot with anxiety and panic attacks, but I didn't know what I had. I was super nervous all the time, afraid. I would go to school and I felt terrified, but I didn't know why. But at that age, I happened to see, this was 1984, and I saw the film Rocky, and he was jumping rope, and I was like, wow, I want to jump rope like that. So I asked my father if I could get a jump rope. So we went down to the athletic goods store, and I bought a jump rope. And I started jumping rope in the basement with AC/DC. Everybody know AC/DC, 1984, Highway to Hell. I started jumping rope, and I realized when I was jumping rope that I started to feel good. I wasn't anxious. And so I jumped and jumped and jumped and jumped a lot. And when I was jumping, rope, I noticed a shift in my whole body and my mentality. My brain was calm. I was listening to music, and it shifted my mood completely. And so when I was moving and jumping rope, I wasn't feeling anxious. Welcome. I wasn't feeling stressed, and I felt happy and good. Now, of course, I couldn't jump rope all the time. But at that age, I didn't know I had anxiety. I just knew I did not feel good a lot of the time, and I had panic attacks, and I was afraid. But the movement helped me in a way I didn't know what I was triggering in my body, but I knew that it made me feel good. Later, I learned a lot more about how exercise and movement can affect our state of being and our mental health and well-being. Excuse me. I felt better. Here. Mira. So what I opened with the jump rope because it was the first tool that I discovered in my life that really, really helped me deal with mental health issues I was having, anxiety. Although at that age, 13, I hadn't been diagnosed with anything. I just knew what made me feel good. And so I started to pursue other things that made me feel good in a good way. Movement. I started exploring in my later teens, food and nutrition that made me feel better. In my early 20s, I started meditation. And apart from the jump rope, which, by the way, I've been jumping, that was when I was 13. It's almost 40 years that the jump rope's been a part of my life. It's a habit that I developed, a good habit. One could maybe say addiction, but not quite. But it was a healthy habit, and so I've almost always had a jump rope with me in my life because I knew if I start feeling anxious, if I start jumping rope, I know I'm going to feel better. And so I used to carry one with me all the time, and now I do it more just because I enjoy it, but it makes me happy. And I saw several of you smile when I started jumping rope or looking at me like, what is she doing? But jump rope is a tool for fitness, but that fitness also, not just for the outside, not just for the body, it's a mental health tool. It's a tool for mental fitness as well. And so along with when I started discovering food and how I could change how I felt by what I ate, that was kind of a second tool that I discovered. A third, as I mentioned, is meditation. I started meditating when I was 23 years old. I learned transcendental meditation. It completely changed my experience of my mental state, of how I could perceive my thoughts and how my thoughts triggered anxiety, because that's the theme of today is how do we manage anxiety in an uncertain world? How do we find calm and tranquility? Even if you don't have panic attacks or extreme anxiety like I had, most of us experience some kind of anxiety in our lives. And a lot of it I would say, I argue most anxiety is triggered by our thoughts and our thought processes. Why? Because we have at least two parts to our brain. Anxiety lives in the part of our brain, older part of our brain, not our prefrontal cortex, which is our kind of our thinking brain that's more modern. It lives in our more antique brain, let's just say our older prehistoric brain, and we're programmed for fight or flight. Many of you may have heard fight or flight before. This is the reaction of we need to either go up against a predator or some fear that we might have, or we want to run away from it. Often with anxiety, we want to run away, or we feel the fear. That part of our brain gets activated all the time in modern society. Even though we don't have predators now, we're not running away from lions and things in general. But what we do have today, that's not predators, but we have a lot of information in our modern world that can trigger anxiety for many people. And extreme anxiety or not, we have different levels of anxiety. We can just feel a little bit of stress, a little bit of worry about the future. We can also have panic attacks, and like I experienced, I couldn't even leave the home for a while because I had so much anxiety and worry. And sometimes we can't even put a name on why we feel anxious or stressed, but we feel it. If you notice today, I don't have any slides. I don't have any PowerPoint. You have a little piece of paper here. That's really intentional. I'm a little old school in that way. So those of you who are into technology, I use technology when I need to, and it's a tool, and it can help. But I also feel with our state of the world these days, it's important for us to unplug. And so I like to say we can unplug to really plug in. And what does that mean? Unplug from our screens, from our phones, from our constant attachment to technology, and really go inside and just be with ourselves. How often do we do that? We're often, usually, we go practically in the shower with our cell phone, when we're walking down the street with our phone, or if we're not on our phone, we're on our computers. If we're not on our computer, maybe we're listening to music. But how often are we just with ourselves? So I don't have a PowerPoint because I prefer to just engage with you all here. And thank you so much for being here and paying attention and looking. I love seeing all of your faces here. So getting back to anxiety and the levels of anxiety that we can experience from our thoughts, it's difficult because anxiety is often the thought pattern spinning a little bit out of control. Do any of you, you don't have to share it now, but if you don't want to, but does anyone feel comfortable saying if they experience anxiety in any way or form? Or you could just simply nod, or can people relate to what I'm saying about anxiety? Yeah.
You need to sit down and work, and you feel like standing up, walking, running, moving, something's wrong.
Yes.
Something's wrong in your mind. And that's tough. As I said, unplug to plug in again.
Yeah, so your urge was maybe to move or do something.
Drink water.
And this is great. I'm going to talk a little bit about that later, but this is a great point because you have the urge to change what you're doing, which changes what signal our brain is sending to our body. So with the different levels of anxiety that we can experience, some we might feel kind of a little bit of stress to higher anxiety. But the good news is if we realize that it's a thought process in general that triggers anxiety, other things could trigger, like foods can contribute to it. So a lot of caffeine obviously could contribute to feeling anxious. Some other things that we could put in our bodies. A lot of sugar can also trigger anxiety. There are various things that, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, that can trigger anxiety. But the good news is that anxiety and stress are absolutely treatable, and absolutely we can manage them, and we can learn to manage them by creating habits and lifestyle changes that can help us manage our anxiety and stress. And that's the really good news, because I spent years not understanding what anxiety was, and I felt really hopeless, helpless, trapped, afraid, scared. I mean, it's maybe you don't see it now, but I was really good at hiding it as well. I didn't want anyone to know. So I was a high functioning anxious person. So I literally, I could do a lot of things, but there were a lot of things I couldn't do, and I missed many, many